Welcome. Hi, I'm Pooja.
I'm Peter.
And we are delighted that today you've taken out time and joined us for this webinar. Good morning to my colleagues from Europe, Central Asia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and also good morning, a very good afternoon to my colleagues from India, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. I also see some colleagues have joined us from Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and also from the US. So thank you very much for giving us this kind of response and encouragement to make this webinar happen. Without losing much time, I'm going to quickly get into some admin suggestions. You can send me your questions while we are on this webinar using the live chat feature, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, of the YouTube screen that you see. You just need to be logged in using your YouTube account, and the chat screen can also pop out if you use the 3 dots. So it's easier for you to watch the webinar and the presentation while also ask questions. In case you're in a public place, need I say that please use your headphones so that the voice is clear. Also, if you're on the move in a car, on your way to office, or coming back to office from a meeting, there might be instances that your network will get disconnected. Just hop back on the link that we have provided, and you're going to have you're going to join us from where we are. There could be network issues at our end as well. We might also go out of network. So just hang in there and we are going to come back. We want to use this webinar as an opportunity to start a dialogue. So we are also live on social media. I shared with you the hashtags and the social profiles where you should get in touch with us, and you should send us your questions, your comments, and you can make it very, very active and interactive. So without further ado, I think what is most important for me is to request Peter to introduce himself, what he does, his work, and then I think we can set a context of why actually and how this webinar came about to be. Peter.
Okay, thanks, Pooja. So I am Peter Rechmann. I work for GoVT in the Federal Institute of Vocational Training in Germany. The short form is BIP, from the German short form, of course. GoVT is an office, is a one-stop shop for international cooperation in VET. So we are basically available for anyone, everywhere, anywhere in the world who's interested in the German VET system or in German cooperation, international cooperation in VET. And because we are in the BIP, we are embedded here, we work with the colleagues from the BIP, we can also handle a lot of questions regarding more scientific, more specific problems of the dual VET system. So GoVT exists since 2013, and any one of you who is interested in dual VET in Germany or in cooperating with Germany may contact us. I am with GoVT since 2.5 years, and before that I worked in international cooperation projects in VET, and also for a while as a business advisor at the Chamber of Skilled Crafts.
Right, and currently you are heading the GoVET Secretariat, so I know you're working with so many countries and so many partners to, on bilateral and multilateral cooperation.
Yes, my specific task here is to organize the round table for international cooperation in VET, where the German partners meet.
Right.
But I do a lot of interaction with foreign partners indeed.
And needless to say, Peter, I'm really thankful that you joined me because, as you know, as many of you know, for the last year or so, I've been stationed at BIBB, and I've been researching the aspects of long-term benefits of investing in vocational education and training, both from the social and the economic perspective. And as a German Chancellor's Fellow, my research is sponsored by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and this has provided me an opportunity to be associated with BIBB and GoVET and IMOVE and the several other entities which are functioning to make vocational education and training more competitive. And during one of those inquiries, the question came up that what is it that the German model has, the dual VET model has, that the industry is in the driver's seat when it comes to vocational education or skilling, as it is known in India. And naturally, I had a very interesting year. Not to forget my introduction with German, which is still in a very beginner stage. But I was constantly looking at the German system from a developing country's perspective. One part is that there is a German vocational education model, but how do we transfer that into a non-dual system? And that is where Peter and I got talking, and I asked him that I understand investing in VET is voluntary and also has historical significance because it started at the time of Industrial Revolution, so to speak. But what is it that drives your companies? And what is the business case for companies here? And how can this be useful for the non-dual web system? That's when Peter told me that he was working with chambers, and all throughout his stint with the chambers and now with GoVET, that's what he does. And so this idea of the webinar came through, and we are here now presenting it to you. So since none of you have given us any comments or anything, we have some comments. I think I'm gonna go one by one through them. Let's just immediately dive into the presentation itself. Peter, we've all heard a lot about the German system of training and how apprenticeships are well integrated into the education system. Now, this system is also for young learners, which is an opportunity to learn and to earn. And can you give a brief overview of the system? Of course, a lot of our participants know about it, have been engaging with you. But what is the German system of training? How it works? Who all are involved? How is it regulated? And most importantly, who funds what and why?
I have prepared a presentation for this webinar, which consists of some things that GoVT is offering on their website, on our website, and which is mainly based on research of the BIBB. And I would like to share some things with you.
Okay, I'm just going to get the presentation started. Please give me a second. Yeah.
Oh. So your first question was a brief introduction on the dual VT in Germany. Starting point of all dual VT in Germany is the Apprenticeship Contract. That's similar to a work contract and the legal basis for incoming training in the dual VT in Germany. What is important to know, this is a voluntary contract, so there is no legal obligation for any company to sign any contract with anyone, and no legal obligation for any apprentice to work in an apprenticeship company. So this is a voluntary agreement. This contract is registered once signed with the chamber organizations, which monitor vocational training. They're the competent body for vocational training in Germany. And the contract regulates things like practical things like the duration of training, the beginning and end of training, the probation time, vacations, content of training, the training allowance, of course, what the apprentice will receive during his training, and conditions under which the contract could be terminated. What is important is that each contract will also define which profession you are learning, and this profession then follows certain regulations in Germany that are existing for each profession. So there's a training plan, an internal training plan attached to it, so to say. So we sign the apprenticeship contract, and then we start work-based learning in dual VT. So the contract is signed, it's registered with the chamber, and the business then has to register the young person also with a vocational school, because then starts learning in the company and also in a vocational school. Usually apprentices spend about 70% of their time in the company, in the production process, where they learn hands-on. But 30% of their time, they have to go to a vocational school. So on the one hand, you have learning in the production process, where the company establishes all the necessary conditions for the learning at the workplace, where the company pays an allowance to the apprentice, and where the apprentice takes over more and more complicated tasks in the course of his training. And at the same time, usually 1 to 2 days per week, the apprentice goes to the vocational school where he learns theory. He learns a theory of his particular subject, but he will also have general subjects such as German, mathematics, even sports and religion. Now, the vocational schools are run by the government, that is in Germany, the Bundesländer, the states, and they finance these schools also. So they shoulder all the costs. The visit of the vocational school is free for the apprentice. And in the company, of course, the company shoulders all the costs. The company has to pay the training allowance and cover any other costs related to the training. So 2 learning venues, shared responsibilities, and also shared coverage of costs. So how are the costs in the dual system shared? Some figures from Germany. On the one hand, in Germany, we have about 438,000 companies engaging in dual VT. That's about 20.7% of all companies. Most of them are small and medium-sized enterprises, but all big companies, all stock market listed companies also engage in this. And they contribute about 7.7 billion on a macro level. So this is the overall net costs of dual VT. We will later on see that the gross costs are a bit higher, much higher actually. They are 25.6 billion. And the companies train more than 500,000 new trainees every year, 66% of which are then taken over into a long-term working relationship. The average investment of a company in dual VT in Germany is 18,000 per apprentice per year, 62% of which is the training allowance. But as we have seen already, we have net costs and we have gross costs. 70% of this investment is usually refinanced by the productive contribution of trainees during the training period. And then we have the government, which shares the expenses for VT with the employers. The government funds the vocational schools. We have about 1,600 of them. That is 2.9 billion per year. And it also invests another roughly 2.5 billion for steering the system, monitoring, research, and supporting people, advertising the system, and so on. Now, how about the apprentices? The apprentices receive an average training allowance at the moment of 854 gross per month. They visit the vocational schools free of charge. But of course, they incur opportunity costs because while in the training process, they could do something else. And these 854 gross per month looks, of course, like a lot when you're now watching from a developing country or industrializing country. But the minimum wage in Germany would be 1,530 roughly. So the apprentice also forgoes a certain salary that he could get if he would just go and work without any qualification as an unskilled laborer.
Wow. So that's very interesting, Peter. You mentioned about the cost-benefit approach, basis which the chambers advise the companies to get involved in the WET system. Now, what is this cost-benefit approach? Since I work with industry, I understand that you have a certain metrics that comes up with the inputs in dual WET system and the benefits. But what could be the metrics and some of the findings of the BIB study, which I know is a massive exercise? And just to make it a little bit more interesting, let's take a business case. Imagine I'm a CEO of a mid-sized machine tools company and I'm making a business plan for the next year. I want to engage apprentices because it helps me reduce costs while securing a steady supply of fresh talent. I'm, however, concerned about the cost and that effort in training the person shall be greater than the returns I can expect. And I can imagine some of my colleagues in India are nodding their head or smiling that there is also an issue of poaching and talent retention, which is also my concern. I speak to you as an advisor on the costs and benefits of training, for example, at a Chamber of Commerce or Skill Crafts. In many countries like India, in Vietnam, the role will be that delivered by sector skill councils. So what advice will you give me?
Yeah, so let's jump into that. First question is simply, how would any businessman calculate if he was planning to employ apprentices, engage in training and apprenticeship scheme. And we have basically, first of all, we have an abstract idea. Any company that plans to do anything will usually calculate its costs and its benefits and then come to a figure for the net costs or maybe the net benefit. And this is what you should do, that any businessman should do. If you want to engage in training an apprentice, take a sheet of paper and write down all the possible costs that you will incur from that and write down the benefits, and there's your net costs. And I would like to show you how this model has been used in the BIB to calculate the average costs in Germany, to find out about why do employers engage in vocational training. And you may see in the course of the presentation that you can apply this model to your country as well. There are, of course, slight differences between this survey of about 3,000 companies that the colleagues from the BIB did and an actual business plan, because you will see later on that we are also looking at some opportunity costs, which you cannot put into a profit and loss sheet. But the methodology will be the same on a micro and also on a macro level. So what are the costs of apprenticeship training that you have to take into consideration when you want to employ apprentices? First of all, of course, we have the apprentices' benefits. And according to the study, which was conducted by Wenzelmann, Jansen, Schönfeld, and Pfeiffer in the BIB, the latest one is from 2012 to 13, the main part is 62% is training allowance plus the social benefits and the fringe benefits. So that is money that is, of course, negotiated, and social benefits are government regulated. You have to add them, and some fringe benefits depend on the contract, on the general contract that the employers do with the trade unions, or some voluntary benefits. So this is the biggest chunk, is the apprentices' benefits. Then we have, of course, salaries of trainers. You cannot do vocational training in a company without having pedagogically qualified people, without having trainers. And of course, when these trainers are training apprentices, they will not be as productive as without doing that. And so you have to calculate their salaries that you're paying while they're training the young people. In Germany, in the survey, this came to about 23%. So salaries of full-time trainers, part-time trainers, and also in some cases, external trainers. We then have equipment costs. First of all, the workplace of the apprentice has to be set up. There's tools, machinery, materials. Bigger companies, especially bigger companies, have specific training workshops where the apprentices learn some activities which are not part of the production process. And then in some cases, we have company lessons. But you see, the equipment comes to only about 5% of the overall gross costs. Then we have other costs. We have training documents. We have protective gear of the apprentice. We have administration fees. We have some external training, and we have chamber and examination fees in the course of training. In Germany, apprentices visit training courses at the chambers that the company has to pay for. And of course, the final exam, there's a fee for the final exam that has to be also shouldered by the company. So here you have an overview of the gross costs of apprenticeship training. And this is basically, I guess, valid wherever you are in the world. These costs will just be there and have to be accounted for. But then we have benefits. And I'm looking I'm looking at the short-term benefits that the apprentices will generate for your company. The most important one here is the productive contributions during the apprenticeship. While doing his 70% of training time in your company, the apprentice will be actually in the production process. And he will do simple tasks. And the longer the training takes and the more qualified he will become, he will also do tasks that normally only skilled workers can do. So, and these are the most important benefits that we have identified. About 50% are attributable to simple tasks and about 47% to skilled tasks. And then I mentioned the production workshops. In some of these workshops, they produce products that can be used in the production process and so on. That's another 1.5%. And in some rare cases, companies can get some public subsidies for engaging in vocational training, especially from the European Union, but also from the German government. So this is a list of the benefits we have. And that is the short-term view, so to say. Now, how would you calculate these? I must say that in the BIP survey that I'm quoting here in my presentation, these simple tasks and skill tasks were calculated by looking at the opportunity costs. So let's say the apprentice has 4 hours per day of productive work, then you would calculate how much would you have to pay to an external worker to fulfill that task. And that money you save because you have the apprentice, and that is his benefit. Of course, when you do a business plan, you would do it slightly differently. You would have to estimate the contribution of the apprentice to the turnover of your company. And I know from my experience that this is the way chambers, for example, do it. When you do a business plan, you're using a profit and loss sheet, and you can, of course, not account for opportunity costs. You will then estimate how many percent of productivity does the apprentice achieve in year 1, 2, 3, and so on. And you can attribute a certain turnover to him. And that is something you see in practice. You see in crafts companies in Germany, when you need a plumber and he comes to your house and he repairs something, often he will bring the apprentice, and the apprentice will contribute to the repair or installation or whatever happens. And in many cases, his hours will also be on the invoice. You pay for that as a customer. So there is a very direct relationship between the turnover of the company and the apprenticeship. Now, if we look at this over a 3-year training period, and this is again a result from the BIP survey, what I just described, of course, changes over time. You can see here how in a 3-year training period, the gross costs and the benefits change. So in the first year, the gross costs are much higher than the benefits, and the net costs are quite high. And over time, the net costs decline because the productivity of the apprentice increases. So we have here a case, 3-year training period, representative numbers, where we have average net costs of 11,352 over the whole 3-year period. So we still have net costs, but we will later on see that these are also covered by some other productive contributions of the training situation. But this is the basic model that you use. You calculate the cost of an apprentice, you calculate the benefits, especially the productivity that he can generate within the company, and so you get basically a cost-benefit analysis.
I think we are getting a lot of questions, and there's one very interesting question that has come up. It has been asked by Miss Kenneth Barrientos. She says that is it correct to conclude, as far as the gross costs are involved, that this mode of training is only applicable for big companies? What are the alternatives for small enterprise? And I think it's a very important point, because in one of my research also it came out that a large number of MSMEs are engaged in the system. So any examples or experiences from that?
Yeah, well, this model and actually the survey covered also small companies, even more small companies than big companies. We will later on see some results of the survey. We will see that the costs and benefits in big companies and small companies differ. And what I can tell you is actually in small companies, the net costs are lower, the net benefits are higher. And in huge companies, the costs, especially the gross costs, are much higher. So there is no reason that SMEs couldn't use this system. Any SME should do his business plan, and then you make one sheet for the apprenticeship cost and benefits, where you calculate how much do I pay the apprentice and how much productivity will he generate.
Okay. And these as a general framework, I think it is a very interesting point of view. You mentioned about the study. So what does it take to conduct this kind of study for the BIB?
Okay, so the study of the BIB was, of course, a scientific study. It was a survey among roughly 3,000 companies. And it had to be, of course, we had to use the proper methodology. My colleague used proper methodology. So you had to see to it what your survey, what your companies, the companies you were asked were like, that you covered big companies as well as small companies, that you covered certain regions to a certain degree. So to do a study of that size, of course, is quite complicated. But we will later on see that other countries have used this approach in much smaller environments, much smaller surveys, where you can still use the basic methodology. And for a single company, as I said, you couldn't do that on one sheet of paper. It's also possible to use this.
Okay. So what are some examples of professions that are in great demand? And I will request you to, share examples from developing countries like India, Philippines, Nigeria, Vietnam, things like auto service, hospitality, construction, retail, mechatronics, which is very big now. And what are some of the short-term and the long-term benefits in VET for companies?
Yeah, okay, so these are two questions. First of all, the different professions. Of course, in Germany, we have about 330 different professions in the dual VT system, and of course, not all were included in this survey. This gives an overview. I know that the slide is not easily readable. We have here on the axis, we have the different professions.
In fact, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, Peter, because some of the people have mentioned that they are unable to view the slides. I have to, unfortunately, disturb the process because it's important that everybody gets the whole message.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, everyone, for the interruption and breaking the flow. Hopefully this will be much better. If not, then I'm going to, in any case, share the presentation so it will be easier. Sorry, Peter, please go ahead.
Okay, so here's some results again from the BIB survey. The important thing at this slide is just that you see there are some professions on the left side of the picture where the net costs are negative, which means there's a net benefit already in the first period of training, in the initial training period. And then there are professions where the costs increase substantially, and we go up to some professions where we have very substantial gross and also net costs. And these are basically professions that are very technical, of a very technical nature, like mechatronic, industrial electrician, this kind of thing, where you need expensive equipment to conduct the training. So first question regarding the different professions. Depending on the professions, you will come to completely different conclusions what the net cost is concerned.
Okay.
And I will give some examples on the next slide. What is also important to mention maybe here is that in this survey of the BIB, the variance between the different companies was quite huge. So you see average numbers here, but everything depends also on a case-to-case situation on the particular company. Now let's have a look at some professions.
Yeah, and there's a question on are these companies that you are mentioning, the basis of this research data, are they all small and medium enterprises or also large enterprises?
No,
a mix, I believe.
It's a mix of both, and the mix is roughly according to the actual composition of the German economy. But most are, of course, SMEs, because most companies in Germany are actually SMEs.
Right.
So let's have a look at some professions and some more results of this survey. You see the average net costs of an apprenticeship from the point of view of the employer over all professions and over all different durations of training is 5,398. Gross costs are almost 18,000. I mentioned that before. And the productive contributions are about 12,500 euros. That's an average. But as I said, it depends actually which profession we're looking at. If you look at the red numbers are normally not liked by business people, but here red numbers mean that we have negative net costs. So there's a net benefit already during the first years of training. For the electrician, for example, for the hotel manager or hotel manageress, and a classical example for the baker. Young apprentices in a baking company, in a bake shop, are productive almost from day one. And therefore, their companies receive quite a huge net benefit. But you see also here, like an IT specialist or an automechatronic, highly technical professions, long also, 3.5 years for automechatronic. We have net costs of 5,500 or 4,600 euros. So it depends on the profession. And these are, I think, some professions that you would also find in any developing or in any growing economy.
Yeah. Now, there's a question that we have got that what is the link what is the contribution of the apprentices when it comes to these kind of calculations? So if you can use an example from here and share something about the typical contribution that an apprentice makes, also considering the fact that this apprenticeship program is 2 to 3 years or 4 years, 3.5 years, and it's not a short-term training program. So it's a long-term commitment that the apprentice is also making into it.
So duration of training in Germany is usually between 2 and 3.5 years. Shortest duration is 2 years and the longest 3.5 years usually. Well, to give you an example, let's look at the hotel manageress. So she learns at a hotel.
Yeah.
And she will, of course, be working at the reception. She will initially even making up rooms, help with the cleaning, help in the kitchen, to see the whole process, to learn about the whole process. She will stay a few weeks at each station, so to say. And when she's there, she's of course working. That means the hotel at that time where she works at the reception or wherever, doesn't need to employ somebody else who would have to do that work. And that is her productive contribution. Or take the young baker. He gets up early, he will be in the bake shop very early, and he will help and he will bake products that are then sold, hopefully the same day. And these are the productive contributions of the apprentices.
And you know why I'm smiling? Because one of our colleagues here asked what was my experience of being here in Germany, and of course in comparison to India and other countries. When you are saying this, I'm actually reminded of my own apprenticeship last year, because to understand the German system, I actually mucked in and I enrolled with two of the largest retail companies, which are also MSMEs, and of course they are gross handlers like the large Walmarts, which is called Rewe Group and the Edeka Group. And I actually enrolled with them as an apprentice. And I must tell you, it was an eye-opening experience, because in that 3 months, of course, I was not doing it as a full-time exercise. It was more like a taster program. But I actually learned everything about running a supermarket, and a supermarket, a hypermarket, from a cash register to managing the warehouse, to what we have to do about vegetables, the cheese station or the meat station. And so I can actually understand when you say that the kind of investment that the companies make to train the apprentice, it's a real investment, and therefore they also expect the returns. There's a question that came up then, Peter, then the selection of the apprentices. In most countries, it is seen that not everyone wants to get into vocational education and training, but young people here seem to be, we are a family of retailers, we are a family of bakers, we are a family of hotel managers, and there's a pride to it. What is your comment on that?
Yeah, well, I mentioned when I introduced the apprenticeship contract to you that this is a voluntary decision. So this happens in the market. in the marketplace. And there are years when companies do not find enough apprentices, or where it's more difficult. There are also years where apprentices find it a bit harder to get an apprenticeship. But both sides are still very much interested in this, because dual VET in Germany can lead to a career. It will give you a well-paying job with which you can have a family and drive a car and so on. I always mention that when I used to work at the chamber, I never found a parking space because the young apprentices were already driving cars.
Wow.
Which apparently you can finance with 800 euros a month. So therefore, dual VET is very much accepted in society as a career path. Well, what the finding of apprentices is concerned, there are, for example, there are websites where both parties can meet, run by the chambers. There are events like profession fairs, events also of the labor office, of the chambers, of the business organizations, where apprentices can, or future apprentices can find out about the different professions, where both can meet. And otherwise, it's just a process of the apprentice applying, sending an application, or in many cases, just making a phone call, and then introducing himself or herself to the company, and the company decides which one to hire. And of course, there are professions that are very popular for men, for the young men in Germany. This is, of course, the automechatronic, but also the business-related, the administrative-related professions, where companies might still have a choice, and they will do this like any HR manager does this. They know what competencies they're looking for, what certificates from school maybe, and then try to make the best choice.
Yeah. And Archana wants to know, is there any minimum age of apprentice to join the industry in Germany?
Yes, you must be at least 16 years old. Otherwise, you cannot work. You're not allowed to work, and apprenticeship means there's work involved.
And you must have also completed your basic schooling.
There is no precondition what schooling is concerned. You must have gone to school, but you must not have passed anything.
Okay.
And of course, you continue visiting the school. For the young apprentices, when they visit the vocational school, these 30% of their apprenticeship time, they actually still fulfill their obligation to visit a school at the same time by doing that.
Okay. Ken wants to know, how does the interaction between the companies and schools take place? How do the sites for theoretical learning get matched with the company programs? What is that matchmaking process?
First of all, I said the company has to register the young person with the vocational school. Everything, when to go to the school and so on, is actually pretty much standard now. You know, we have two days of the year where apprenticeships usually start, and everybody knows when to go to school, when to send the person to school. But we, of course, talk also about the coordination and cooperation of the learning venues. And what happens in Germany is that the two parties involved here, the government, which is running the vocational schools, and the businesses and their organizations, they meet on many levels and for many occasions. So at the chambers, we have vocational training committees where the teachers and the representatives from the business community, and by the way, the representatives from the trade unions, meet regularly and discuss this kind of issues. We have the same on the Länder level, the federal states level, and also on the federal level. So here, especially here in our institute at the BIP, we have a committee on vocational training also, where political decisions regarding vocational training are made by these parties.
Which is called the Parliament of Skills.
It's kind of Parliament of Vocational Training, yes.
And I had the honor of observing that.
But the person who asked that question, of course, has seen an important issue here.
Right.
Business and government have to cooperate in the dual VT model. That's very important.
Now, on that point only, there was a question earlier. Praveen Arya had asked this, that when we say the business case, for example, in his case from India, in particular, it's seen from the prism through government-funded programs. Is there a case for VET where companies or candidates can invest in their training? So do you have any comments on that?
Well, basically, in the dual model that I'm presenting here, everybody's investing. Yeah, the government is funding the schools mainly. The business is investing the salaries, especially, and what we what we described here as the gross costs. And the apprentices are investing their time. And I said, if they do not do an apprenticeship and start working right away, they would earn more. However, what they do, they invest, of course, in their training to earn much more after their apprenticeship has finished, hopefully with a positive result.
Right. Great. So then I think that's the big next question that everybody has in mind, and I have been receiving, is that how can this be applied to non-dual training systems? And are there any examples or experiences, please?
Before I answer that question, I would like to come to the other question you asked me before, that is about some more medium-term costs. I have now looked at these cost benefits basically from a short-term period. I would like to add 1 or 2 slides on the more medium-term benefits of apprenticeship. Conclusion of what we said so far is that in Germany, according to the survey, roughly 1/3 of companies achieve a net benefit already during the apprenticeship. Well, there's still some net costs, and you may ask, why do they then engage in vocational training in the apprenticeships if they have net costs? Doesn't make sense. Well, there are more medium-term expenses that the employer also saves when he engages in apprenticeship. And one thing is, I said that in dual VET, about 2/3 of the young people stay within their company after the apprenticeship. So the company employs them after that, and their salary will at least double. It will usually triple. But by doing so, the companies save recruitment costs for externally trained skilled workers. And these recruitment costs were also part of the BIP survey of 2012 and 13. And this slide here shows the recruitment costs for all sectors and different sectors. The violet piles here, these are the overall recruitment costs. This is, of course, again, average numbers. What are recruitment costs? Well, first of all, you have an application procedure that costs time, and people engaged in that are paid salaries. So that money you save if you do not recruit from outside. You then have induction training. So the person you take from outside needs to be shown what to do and how to do it, needs to be shown around at the company. And the time invested by the people who do that is, of course, money. Time is money. Again, we have costs. But the highest costs are actually what we call induction costs. That means 2 things. First of all, the productivity of the people showing recruits from outside how to do a certain task. The productivity decreases during that period because they have to take their time not on productive tasks, but on inducing the external people. And the second thing is that those people coming from outside are initially not as productive as they could be after the induction period. And these are, of course, costs, and all this amounts to very high amounts. And what the survey here then shows is, even if you still have net costs from the short-term view, by saving recruitment costs, you can save indeed much more. And that is sure a very important motive of companies to engage in dual VET. And what was found out in this survey was also that the bigger the company, the higher the recruiting costs. Of course, big companies are very complex companies, and to introduce somebody to his work takes much longer than in a small company. And therefore, I see a reason for big companies also to engage in dual VET, because they can save so much recruitment costs. Here's another view on that for different professions. And you see here in the middle that hiring IT experts in German businesses is extremely costly from the market. There's a lot of competition. There's apparently a lot of induction costs. But even for simple professions like a cook, these hiring costs, recruitment costs, amount to almost 7,000 euros. And if you have net costs of, let's say, 6,000, 5,000, when you have recruitment, you save recruitment costs about 7,000. So even on that medium-term view, apprenticeship still pays for the company.
Now, there's a question that, for example, these are instances where you have small, medium companies or large companies. But what about companies that do not have the wherewithal, or they just need 1 or 2 apprentices? What is the format then they engage with? I mean, could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, that is actually the most common case is a crafts company or a small enterprise that has 2, 3, 4 apprentices. The system is not much different. In bigger companies, it's probably, it is usually more formalized, the whole thing. They do, I remember, even I applied, of course, for apprenticeships when I was still young. They do tests, for example, for larger groups and then choose the apprentices they want. They have more complicated procedures. For the small companies, it's very often you get the application, you call the person, you have a look at him, you ask him to come to the company, show him around, and then you make your apprenticeship contract.
I must share an incident that happened with me when I went for my interviews during the research process. And someone asked me, what is your apprenticeship? And I give them an explanation. I did my graduation in this and master's in this. So say, but what is your apprenticeship? What are you skilled at? And it was at that moment that I realized that how differently it is viewed, that you have to be skilled. And I think another example, which was also showcased during one of our Indian programs, which is Hunarbaz, which is the story of Professor Esser, who's the president of BIBB, who himself was a baker, and then he kind of went on to gain more academic qualification, and is today heading the largest or the most apex research institution when it comes to apprenticeship.
One more thing. Now we have looked at the short-term benefits, costs and benefits. We have these recruitment costs that you save. You do an apprenticeship in your company. Every 3 years, you again have new skilled workers for your company. There's also some more long-term benefits of apprenticeships that I have to mention. And the BIP survey also asked the companies about these. They are more difficult to measure, of course, but I would like to mention them here. First of all, you have custom fit training when you do dual training. That means you teach company-specific know-how, which an apprentice has, which external recruits do not have, which is a benefit, of course, to your company. And what was found out in that survey, that is that 55% of the companies mentioned that the apprentices from their own company were more productive than external recruits. Then we have, of course, the avoiding of wrong appointments. Sometimes you take someone from outside and is the wrong person, so you have to fire him and get a new person from outside, which, however, in this survey did not play such a big role. But what was very relevant to the German companies was avoiding skilled labor shortages. That's a strategy, especially of the large companies. They simply cannot get all the professionals they need from the labor market if they do not train themselves. And then there are other things like better employee loyalty. Somebody who grows up, so to say, professionally in a company would be normally more loyal to that company than someone from outside. And companies, of course, can boost their image. Engaging in dual VT is actually kind of a CSR measure for companies. And I know that some people prefer to buy at a company that says we are training apprentices. So if we look at this conclusion now from the presentation so far, is we have kind of a balance. We have costs, we have benefits, and the costs, as I mentioned, is equipment, salaries, and so on. And we have benefits. We have those that are hard numbers. We save recruitment costs. We have productive contributions of the apprentices. And then we have the more soft numbers. We have IMIS, CSR. We avoid shortage of skilled labor. We do custom fit training. So if you look at the whole thing as a balance, the benefits outweigh the costs in the dual VT, which makes sense. Otherwise, companies would definitely not engage in dual VT in Germany. And this is basically the conclusion. And I would like to give you a final slide.
Before you get into that, I think we have some questions.
Okay.
And very interesting ones. So there are a couple of questions on the assessment aspect. So does the industry participate in the continuous evaluation of apprentices? and what is the evaluation process? So before you dive into the finale part of the slide, the cost benefit, we should answer this right now.
Yeah, fine. Of course, one thing is the continuous monitoring that was mentioned in the question. In the vocational school, the progress of the student is, of course, measured in the usual ways. You have tests, you have exams, you get certificates for your different subjects and grades for your different subjects. While in the company, you get immediate feedback, of course, from your trainers, from your bosses within the company. And then there's a formalized, of course, examination process. Usually you have 2 exams during your apprenticeship, which is actually normally this is 2 parts of the final exam. The first part would happen roughly in the middle of your apprenticeship, and the second part then at the end. There's a final exam, and we have examination boards which conduct that, which consists of the representatives of employees organizations, employers organizations, or the chambers, and the teachers from the vocational schools. So examination board has 3 members from each of these parties, and you're given theoretical tasks to solve. That could be multiple choice tests, but also other tests. You could be given a project, or you could be given a practical exam. For example, if you want to be a mechatronic, you will be given a car and you have to find, and the car is not functioning, you have to find out why, and you have to try to repair it. Or you even have to, before that, talk to the customer. Somebody will play the customer and show how you interact with the customer as an auto mechatronic. So we have a formalized examination process with examination boards. That means the teachers and the trainers that actually train the young person are not involved in this final examination, but an independent examination board, which, by the way, is made up of volunteers in Germany. So these people are volunteers. They just get their costs paid, and they do this. Many of them do this for many years or even decades. And this examination board then decides if you have passed the exam, and then you get your final certificate, which states that you are a baker or mechatronic or whatever. This certificate is issued by the competent body, that is the chambers. I mentioned that before. And this is a certificate that is accepted by every organization, by everybody in Germany.
Right. Okay.
So finally, some ideas for you, some literature that you can read if you're interested in the different motives that we have now mentioned while presenting the cost-benefit approach. So we have the production motive. Why do companies train young people? We have the production motive. Companies train mainly because they want to benefit from the apprentice's productive contribution. That is one thing I mentioned. The productive contribution is an important motive, and you can even tailor your training process as a company to have more productive contributions than others. So there's a certain, even within the rules of the German VET system, you have a certain leeway, you have a certain flexibility to tailor the apprenticeship and get the apprentices to work for you. But of course, do not lose out of sight the necessity to actually train him and make him learn a profession. Then we have the investment motive. What we mentioned is that companies retain the apprentices because they need skilled employees in the future. So they invest in the dual VT and then have skilled workers and laborers for the company. We also have a screening motive. When the apprentice is in your company for 3 years, you get to know him and you can really find out if he's the right person to stay with your company, if you want to employ him further, if you want to you can even choose. Some employers employ more apprentices than they would like to retain, and then they choose the best ones. Then we have the motive of social responsibility. I mentioned that, the CSR, and the motive of reputation. So with these motives of engaging in training, my presentation on the cost and benefit aspects of dual VT has come to an end.
Great. We have a lot of questions here, but I think let's complete the part where we can transfer this to the non-dual systems. And then I have some questions on specific to countries, which we can then take.
Yes, what I would like to tell you is that this approach of the BIB has been already used in other countries. I would like to mention the Philippines. The Philippines have a close cooperation with the BIB. That is the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry and TESDA especially, and they conducted a cost-benefit study for their dual training system, DTS, which is not so big in the Philippines, but it exists. There's companies that actually engage in this kind of apprenticeship. And that is something you can find online, and they did, together with BIB and GIZ, they did a very interesting study. So have a look at that. This shows you how you can do a survey BIB style, so to say, in your country. Of course, that only works if you have this kind of apprenticeship. If there's no apprenticeships of that kind, there's nothing to survey in that way. I would like to show you a small example from Vietnam. Vietnam does not have a dual VT system, but what they have is they have internships. So apprentices in Vietnam learn in vocational schools and vocational training centers. And they try to find apprentice for the apprentices, or better for the trainees. They try to find internships. And of course, for an internship, the same applies. The intern will cause costs to the company, and he will cause benefits to the companies. And so there was a case study of 14 enterprises, of course, only, where they measured. That was NIVT together with GIZ and BIB, where they measured the cost and benefits of an internship. So what was done here was we see a transfer of the cost categories that I have mentioned and the benefit categories to the Vietnamese situation. And they came to some interesting findings. I just show you the quantitative results here. On the left, you see the costs of the training, which is of course an average number, and which was also had a very high variance. But these were roughly 142 euros for an intern per month, and they calculated the benefits of the interns. And you see on the right, the benefits were much higher than the actual cost. The benefits through their recruitment consists of the productive contributions and some recruitment costs saved. And also, so we see here that the same categories that the BIB survey used have been used in a totally different context. And you can do that basically wherever you're planning to have practical phases, even in a school-based system or a vocational training center-based system. You have a method to calculate the cost and benefits of these practical phases. And speaking about the schools, you have, of course, the benefit that the schools facilities are not used while the apprentices are in the companies.
Yeah.
This is something what parents know when their kids are on holiday. Certain expenses you save suddenly at home, right? So this is how you could use this cost-benefit approach in the context of other countries as well. And in this survey, they also checked for other benefits and training motives, what the reputation is concerned, the recruitment of skilled workers, and of course, these practical contributions by saving basically for labor. So it's possible to use these results in totally different contexts. The cost-benefit approach gives you a model that can be applied to any practical phase in a company, actually.
Okay. And I think you just answered a very important point I had in mind, that anywhere where there is an element of practical learning and an element of skill learning, this kind of approach can be used, and it can be customized to that situation. So for example, in India, we have these school-based skills at schools programs, skills at colleges program, skills for work programs. So these are the places where this kind of an approach can be used. But of course, it is more the employer-led approach.
Yeah.
And I think here also another point is what we are showing here as a result based on a research which is quantitative. There are several qualitative results as well, which are more social and which are more long term, and they occur gradually because they lead to competitiveness, they lead to increased quality of workforce, and those kind of long term and very slow results.
Yes, but this is now one question, of course, how do you use these kind of results? When you have hard numbers that prove that an
Correct.
apprenticeship actually pays for the companies, it's of course easier to advertise apprenticeships and dual VT with the companies. Of course, these long-term effects also important, but business people, they prefer the hard numbers.
I agree with you totally on that. And okay.
Some food for thought here, which we use on our GoVT presentation. In the end, there's only one thing in the long run more expensive than education, that is no education. And this was apparently said by John F. Kennedy, so it has to be true.
I believe you, and I believe him as well. I think let's take up some questions now, Peter, if you would. And let's get back. Yeah. So I will be looking away from the screen. Everyone, please don't mind, because I have lots of questions here. One of the questions which my colleague Ramesh Verma has been asking is that what is the integration of virtual reality and new age technologies into these apprenticeship programs? I think he's coming more from a program methodology perspective, but there are a lot of questions on that. But would you like to comment on that?
Yes. The question is probably directing at the new developments in technology, which we in Germany call Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
You see these professions, they follow certain training standards. And these training standards are, of course, upgraded regularly. And especially BIP is doing a lot of research now. First of all, how should professions change because of these new technologies?
Right.
Is one thing. Is of course a totally new subject, is a big issue, and it's handled by a task force within the BIP.
Right.
And of course, in industry, practitioners also ask these kind of questions. So we are looking at that, and we have the tools to upgrade our professions and to change even the whole profile of a profession and include these new developments. Normally, these training standards are technology independent. They just claim what tasks you have to solve. But with such groundbreaking new discoveries, of course, professions will also change over time. And we have developed, for example, when we had the IT revolution, we developed new professions. The IT specialist didn't exist 30 years ago as a profession in the dual system. Now it exists, and we will develop new professions, and we will adjust the existing professions to these developments.
And I have a very interesting experience to share. I got a chance to witness the occupation development process, which is very, very different from what I have. Of course, the stakeholders are similar, the intent is similar, and the methodology, so to speak, is similar. But I think typically it takes about 18 months to develop a profession and a new occupation, and then there is a whole cycle of testing it, say for the first 100, 200 apprentices for 3 years, and then there is a process to reevaluate and change the occupation, and only then that occupation is standardized as the national standard. Am I right in my understanding?
Yeah, time differs, of course. In Germany, we try to do this now within a period of about a year, but it can take longer, and it can sometimes be shorter also. There's also a fast track system to upgrade professions. So times differ, but what you mentioned is a good time frame, actually.
Yeah. So then there are now questions also on the whole apprenticeship training, because I think one of the USPs of the German system, because the industry is involved, is that there is a lot of focus on quality. So there are questions I have received on what is the entry qualification for apprentices, what are the trainers, what kind of qualifications do the trainers have, or how the training of the master craftsman is done. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so these are basically 3 questions.
Yeah.
There is no formal entry requirement for dual VT. That is important to know. So the company decides whom they will accept as an apprentice. Of course, if they hire apprentices for mechatronics or electronics, they will see that they have good grades in mathematics, but that is not a formal requirement. That is number one. And number two, what the trainers is concerned, yes, this apprenticeship system can only work if the training staff is qualified. And there are two kinds. We have the trainers within the companies, and we have the trainers at the vocational schools.
Right.
Trainers in vocational schools are academics, so they have to study pedagogics plus a technical or professional subject.
Right.
And the trainers within companies need a pedagogical qualification. There is a standard qualification, that is the training of trainer certificate that we have in Germany that you can do at chambers usually, and you study for that. There's a whole lot of information about this at the BIBV if you're interested. We have a section here in the BIBV dealing with this. There's even a standard for this training of trainers and approved by the government that you can also see online. And so trainers need to be qualified. That does not mean that every person showing the apprentice something in the company needs to be pedagogically qualified. You need to have one for a small number of apprentices, one person like that, who manages the training and who sees to it that proper teaching methods are used. But a company needs to have this kind of person also.
Right. And where the companies do not have the capability to have their own trainers, so they set up those common training institutes. Yes,
still, if you employ, and the master craftsman was also mentioned, let's say you have a small crafts company. This is run by a master craftsman. When you do the exam for the master craftsman, you also have one part for pedagogics. And this, so to say, includes this training of trainer certificate. The master craftsman includes that. It also includes how to run a business, business science, law, and of course the practical and theoretical technical subjects. That's the Master of Craftsman exam. So a Master of Craftsman can employ an apprentice in any case because he covers this training of trainers certificate with his Master of Craftsman certificates.
Yeah. So I'll take up some questions now which are particularly centered around India, and I'll try and answer them where I can. One of the questions that has been recurring is that what is the replicability in the context of India, where there's a huge number of trainees, and this model is compatible. So my submission to that is this isn't a model that is compatible, and it cannot be like plug and play. And the objective of us discussing this is also not to suggest that, oh, this is the best and this is how it can be done. The idea is that this is a system which seemingly is working, which evolved organically because the industry took the lead. And now there is an opportunity through BIBB, through GoVET, to see how we can, use some of these best practices. And a lot of work is also happening at the bilateral level, where the India-German working group is trying to, create these kind of opportunities. So whether it is compatible, I wouldn't say it is directly compatible, but yes, it is customizable.
Yeah, important to notice, and we say that to everybody who approaches GoVET or the BIB for cooperation or advice on how to introduce the dual VT system in my country.
Yeah,
it's a system, and the system cannot be transferred. There are so many different stakeholders that in some cases do not even exist in other countries. And the way they cooperate is also quite unique to Germany, this consensus principle between employers, employees, and the government, for example, when it comes to vocational training. But what you can always do is you can look at certain elements of the system, and that's what we're offering here. For example, with the cost-benefit methodology, you can look at practical phases, and you can calculate their costs and benefits and try to make them more popular in your country, for example.
Yeah, and to answer the question that yes, there have been some experiments in India as well. I think Diban Chakravarti had this question that are there any successes in implementing VET in India? I think IGCC is having a course. Yes, the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce has made some headway in designing or redesigning some part of this program, which is suited to the German companies or the Indian companies which are working. This program is right now, it's called Dual Pro, and you can Google about it and read more about it. And if you need more info, I'll be most happy to share. Then there was a question with the fact that how easy it is for a student to locate his or her vocational training of choice. Are there marketplaces to assist in their admission? I think this is a very good question coming because I also took time when I came from an Indian perspective, because I was looking at everything from that lens. Because in India we work very differently, but here anybody who has a company has to register their company under law, and the moment you register your company under law, you are associated or appointed to a chamber, and the role of a chamber is very different from what we do. We have in terms of our chambers of commerce, or the whether it is CI or FICI, and I have had the honor of serving both the chambers. But the role of the chamber is that it acts as a focal point, and everybody knows about it. So apprentices also know that they have to go and engage the chamber. In fact, the chamber also conducts these ambassador drives. I was part of one of them, where they identify these young boys and girls who are doing very well with companies, and they take them around into schools. When you have this Tag der offenen tour, which is called the Day of the, I don't know what is the English translation for it, but yes. Can you share a little bit about that?
I can give you some examples. The person who asked this question is, of course, right. There's a challenge in finding apprentices and putting them into the right places, so to say.
Right.
And it is a marketplace, and there are many things we're doing. As I said, there are online facilities where you can, as a future apprentice, look for where are open spaces for that particular profession that I'm interested in. There are, as you mentioned, Day of the Open Door in chambers, for example, where the chambers inform about the different professions. They do things together with the labor offices. There are, of course, advisory services at the labor office for young people who still do not know what they would like to learn, and they advise about the different professions. And also schools, the vocational schools have information events where they invite prospective students and their parents. We have cases where the chambers open their doors for teachers, for school teachers, to inform them about professions, so they can inform the children in normal schooling about what professions they might be interested in. So there's a lot of activity, and the different stakeholders of dual VET engage in this process, and it is very important.
And this is supported by the government, which is at the state level or even at the national level sometimes, when you have a national VET week or a program. The other very interesting point is that what is chambers in the German context is perhaps what we have the Sector Skill Council. We have now, in Indian context, I can share, we have about 32 sector skill councils, and these are the kind of activities that which they are doing, or they might, evolve eventually to do it. Very quickly, we had another question that we do not have enough apprenticeship seats in India as no fresh candidates. Can we justify this kind of investing? I think the difference is that it is not limiting. Apprenticeship in this model is not limiting. So for example, if I'm a school dropout, or I chose to take a gap year, which is very common in Europe, because young people take a gap year, they go travel around, they just spend some time and think through what they want to do, and then they come back. So there are these recognition of prior learning mechanisms which allow the student to get into the workforce or the job market, or to get into apprenticeships. But yes, one thing is sure, that the industry always says the younger we catch them, the better it is. They want to immediately get the student as soon as they're out of the school, so that they can be molded and be trained and made industry ready. Are there any other questions, last round questions that you all have? So then I can wrap up with the last segment. Okay, Diban has another question for you regarding the location. Are the companies and the institute in the same place? With respect to trainings, youth from rural areas,
Yes.
it may be a good point.
Mhm.
Yeah, very
That's-
good question.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So this depends on the profession.
Yeah,
In very popular professions or professions where we have more apprentices, you will always have a vocational school also in that particular city or at least in the district where your company is situated.
right,
In rarer professions, glassmaker is such an example, we have some centralized schools all over
Right.
Germany. Maybe the state would have one school, or maybe even one school would cover 3 states. And we then organize the school-based training in block courses. So we will not have the system where you go to work to the company for 4 days and then you spend 1 day in the vocational school.
Right.
But you would go to the company for 3 months and then stay 1 month, for example, in the vocational school.
right. Okay. And on that, link to that is how do you mobilize the people? I think Bibhu Mishra asked this question, which is very big problem and challenge. I can understand where he's coming from. And I think, Bibhu, we just answered it that the mobilization is actually 2 ways, because the students also want to get into apprenticeships and the industry also wants to take them. And there is a regulated mechanism which is making it happen. And I think there's also a concept of practicum. Why don't you share a little bit about that? The practicum, which is the taster program, which the students can do while they are in schools.
Yes, basically in Germany, the concept of internship is quite common. And what we have different kinds, of course, but for students in school, it's possible to have what we call an orientation.
Right.
It's a job orientation program.
Yes.
Where you go to a company for a few days or weeks and you see how does a company function, and where you can find out if you like a particular sector kind of companies or even profession.
Right. Yes, I think then that is what a differentiator is, because it's not limited to that I can try an electrician trade or I can try a retail sales trade. I can try as many trades till I find what I want to do or make my professional career in. And so my favorite uh, statement here has been that the vocational education system is designed to offer careers and not jobs and not just simple placements. And it's therefore it is more long term. And the reason why the German government invests so much in conducting this cost benefit survey, because you have to engage and bring more people on board. We covered this when we started the presentation, but I think you must, if you can share once again as a closing remark, Peter, what is the percentage of companies and what is the amount that both government and companies are investing on an annual basis?
Yeah. So about 20% of all German companies engage in dual VT.
Yeah.
That might look like a low number because it's not 100%, it's not 80%, but you must also understand that not every company in Germany is allowed to actually train. We mentioned there must be certain conditions, especially they must be able to cover a whole profession. So a company that only makes windows cannot train anyone. There is no professional window maker. You can train construction people or wood workers, but so if a company is very specialized, it's difficult for the company to train. There are ways, but it's difficult. The second thing is companies that do not have pedagogically qualified people.
Right.
They can also not train. So this 20% is quite a high number. And as I said, German government and businesses share this, and we have about 7.7 billion euros net costs that the businesses invest. And we have something like 5.9 billion euros that the government invests.
Right. So 21% of German companies are investing 7.7 billion euros
Yes.
per annum to train about 500,000.
500,000 every year.
And the
So-
government is investing 5.5 billion. So in any case, the industry is investing much more than the government put together.
Yes.
While the government is responsible for high level,
Yeah.
the organizing the system,
Yes.
the industry is responsible for organizing the training. And why I am sharing this, repeating this again, is because that itself shows that there is a business case.
I would find it a bit difficult to say the industry is investing more than the government.
Okay.
Because the industry is, of course, getting some benefits,
Absolutely.
which we identified in the presentation,
Right.
and which are in some cases not tangible.
Yes.
So if one would calculate that, then I don't know. We invest more. Important thing is a cost sharing, a burden sharing system.
Perhaps you're right. I should correct myself. Perhaps the industry, if not less, they're investing enough, if not lesser or more, but they are also an equal partner,
Yeah.
and they are both co-financing
And-
the VET system.
And of course, the monetary contribution of the businesses is really high. It's more than
Yeah.
25 billion if you look at the gross costs.
Yeah. So I think since we are also now reaching towards the end of our webinar, first of all, thank you everyone for joining in, and thank you, Peter. I know you're
Welcome.
a very busy person, and December is the year ending, and so you have a lot of things on your table, but you have been very patient. And you joined us, answered all our questions. A lot of them were not even pertaining to the idea of cost benefit, but mostly on the apprenticeship system. Thank you everyone for joining in. The objective of organizing this webinar was to share some bits of the experience that I have had in Germany. Of course, this is just the beginning, and I would want to continue this conversation. I would invite you all to give me feedback. I'll be sharing the web link of this webinar along with a copy of a presentation and the feedback form. So please do fill that in. Take 5 minutes out from your busy schedules and let me know what other topics are of interest to you. I also saw some of you mention that we perhaps could set up a closed group of like-minded professionals, VET professionals. Of course, we can do that specific to cost benefit, but there is a UNESCO Univoc TVET forum. I would really urge all of you to sign up for that and make most of a very vibrant forum which is already existing. And last but not the least, I think I have to thank 3 very important players, which is BIBB, of course, our team at GoVET, because organizing this webinar was a first for all of us, and we were very patient with it. And of course, the Humboldt Foundation, who gave us this opportunity as Chancellor's Fellow to be here and to immerse ourselves into our respective topics and make most of it. For any questions, any follow-up, anything you want to know, because Peter talked about a lot of things which were beyond the topic of the webinar, for now I will continue to be your contact point. Please send me your queries, and then I will divert you to the right person, so that your inbox is not full of questions like my inbox already is. Thank you again, and please do share your ideas and more about this. Keep the conversation going online, because it is very, very important that we get the industry on board. And thank you once again, everyone. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
And as they say in Germany, auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah, Pooja, it was a pleasure.
Oh.
For me also a first webinar, and it was a nice experience.
Yes.
I see that there's a lot of interest in our dual VT system, and of course you are, for this particular group, you are the contact point, but GoVT is always willing also to support stakeholders internationally when it comes to information
Naturally.
about dual VT and so on. So
Naturally.
It was a pleasure, and thank you for organizing this.
Thank you, everyone, and have a very good day, very good evening, and we hope to have another round of webinar again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.